This is Insight. Phone lines are open. Dial 384-2191.
Well, into a Friday, the second Friday of the month of March, so we are joined in here by the members of Marshfield PD this morning, Lieutenant Travis Esser, and I guess assistant or acting now? What do you...
Assistant's fine.
Okay, for the time being. Pat Zepps is here. Before we get started, one thing along the note of the city here that we've been notified of, that the city administrator Steve Barg announced that City Hall and Everett Rail Marshfield Public Library are reopening their facilities to the public as of this coming Monday. Now, if you're watching us on video and replay on the cable channel 989 or at Marshfield Media Access in the future here. Of course, you already know that, but this is going to be coming up on Monday. The Parks and Recreation Department and Senior Center located in the Community Center, and also with the Communications Department and the Marshfield Media Access located at City Hall Plaza, wastewater, treatment plants, police, fire, and rescue facilities are all currently open now with coronavirus precautions set in place, along with adhering to the guidelines established by the state of Wisconsin. The street department going to remain closed to the public except for deliveries, and Marshfield utilities will remain closed to the public at this time. But the City Hall and their library are going to be opening for patrons once again. Were you, your lobby was ever shut down, or what was the situation at your law enforcement building?
Yeah, the lobby was never technically shut down. I think that'd be really problematic for the citizens, just given the way that complaints are made and we render services. So like all the other city departments, we did put up some protective glass, but we did keep the lobby portion open. What we had done is try to restrict people coming past that point over the course of the last year, just to, kind of keep the staff from exposure, because one of the biggest struggles we had was making sure that we had enough police officers, staff to respond to calls. So, but the lobby did remain open throughout that time.
Do you have much walk-in stuff? I mean, give me an example of why people would come down and talk to you.
Oh, all the time, yeah. They'll come in to file reports. They'll come in to speak to officers about follow-up on cases. They'll come in to ask questions. We also have resources that sometimes they'll come in and grab. Some folks come in and look at some accident reports. So it's actually quite busy.
Do you, with accident reports, is that a lot of internet now? I mean, I would imagine lawyers and such, if there's any cases involving that, or even if people want to know for their insurance purposes, they need an official report.
Yeah, right. That's all gone to an online system. So when you go and you respond to an accident and you investigate it, and I know because I had an accident last summer. It wasn't my fault, though. A little out of touch with this part of it, but yeah, I was given the card. So what happens is it takes you to a site where you can enter your number and get access to your accident report. So pretty efficient.
Who showed up for that incident?
We had a lieutenant come up and do that. So, but that was a really simple one. So that wasn't the hardest part about that was my freaked out 11-year-old who that was his first time. So we got rear-ended. But hey, it happens, and everybody was okay. And that's been doing this long enough that I've certainly had some accidents that were my fault in the past. So everybody walks away. We're happy.
My sheet was about as long as your arm at one point in time in my life.
Why do I believe that?
I remember when the officer showed up, I called, "Hey, Charlie." He says, "What happened?"
Yeah.
I said, "I screwed up." I knew him on a first-name basis, and so I would just tell him what happened. There was no bluffing here.
Nope. You own it and you move on.
That's what happens. So with the opening of, now your building's been open, how has your department fared through COVID?
I would say, by standards, I would say we fared extremely well. We did have our struggles. We had people go out on quarantine. We did have some exposures. So one of the challenges was to make sure that we had enough people to backfill that. And there was amazing federal money that you could actually tap into to reimburse you if you had to backfill with overtime for COVID absences. So with our schedule, we stayed on the 12, our 12 on, our 2 on, 2 off, 3 on, 2 off type schedule. We kept the shifts intact, and luckily we rode the storm fairly effectively. There was some costs incurred, but we were able to maintain services and have enough people there.
It was pointed out here, too, in recent days, that as far as the schools are concerned, even it was with the quarantining that really shut things down as much as actual cases themselves. But once one is reported, then everybody in proximity is also out, including the teacher.
Right.
So anything in your department, anybody in proximity, the health department says everybody's on the bench now.
Yeah, and some of that does apply. There is an exemption for a first responder, like for us in the fire department, that we can, for emergency purposes, bring those people back if they're not positive, if it was just a quarantine off of exposure. We really never had to go there, but because you have to have police and fire services, so if somebody was exposed but they weren't positive or symptomatic, we could bring them in if we needed them on a first responder type basis and just do the best that we could to isolate them in a squad, make sure that they're isolated in the building, and make sure that they're wearing the proper PE if they have to go on calls. So that was always hanging out there as kind of a security blanket.
Talking with Assistant Chief Pat Zepps here on today's Inside program, this second Friday of the month. You may be watching us in video here on Marshfield Media Access, Channel 989 on your Spectrum digital tier as well. When the first days came around, PPE was tough. How did the department fare there? Were you short? Did you catch up, or how did you ration what you had?
We fared well. We, again, this community is amazing, and we had people making us masks and dropping them off. More of the surgical type masks, we did have some. We were able to get enough to get us through. And really all we were kind of doing was in a triage mode to make sure we had enough to get us through until it became more available. So we did well in that area. For what we needed, we had enough. We certainly didn't hoard it, and we were willing to share as according. We had communications with the fire department if we would have gotten to a bind, or they would have. So, but we were able to weather that storm as well. So we had a decent supply that got us through.
We actually had citizens donate sanitization wipes, containers of wipes and stuff to us as well, which was much appreciated because we were running low on those. And then latex gloves, we were starting to run a little bit low on those, but thankfully it didn't get to the point where we ran out before we were able to get those orders filled again. So
as we look back on it now, there wasn't even any on the shelf. There wasn't any to get.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
For a while, things were running really short on sanitation supplies there. Talking with Marshfield PD, Travis Esser here. You've had, in recent days, some success in drug busts, and I don't know. I guess what I want you to do is take us through how that happens. I mean, from initial contact, there had to be some probable cause of some kind for the officer to think that there was something, whether it was a plate number that matched something or whether it was suspicious activity, movements or whatever. But how does that happen?
A lot of the ones that you're referencing are traffic stops, and that stems from a whole variety of different things. Sometimes it's just a random stop. Sometimes we have information that has been given to us by a citizen or someone that person might be carrying a certain amount of drugs with them. Sometimes it's just the fact that the officer recognizes a car who they know belongs to someone who they've arrested for drug type offenses in the past. So there's all kinds of things at play there. They're always a little bit different. But an officer can, if they find a reason to stop that vehicle, whether that driver they know doesn't have a valid driver's license or that plate is expired or there's an equipment issue or whatever, they can make that stop. But when you reference probable cause, a lot of times where we get our probable cause and those types of stops actually comes through the use of our K9 units. And the courts have upheld that a K9's ability to sniff for those illegal substances is actually probable cause. So that's the way that we eventually make entry into those cars and search the people that are in the cars and ultimately find the things that the dog indicates to.
Do you need cause to have the dog?
No, we don't need cause.
You only have a certain amount on any shift, probably one per shift on duty. So if it's not that vehicle, if it's not that cruiser or whatever that stops, then they have to be called in. So there had to be some cause there for the officer to think that they needed to sniff.
Yep, and sometimes we're just out doing interdictions where we'll have canines come in on overtime and work a span of 4 hours, knowing that that's our goal in that particular point of time. Sometimes we're working grant-funded interdictions like that, where we'll have extra canines available to do those things. But otherwise, it's guys and gals on shifts that are are out there making traffic stops, and if they have a canine working on their shift and they believe that there's something suspicious, or the likelihood, like I said before, again, that they know that this person has used in the past, or they see things in plain view in the car that suggest to them that there might be some illegal substances in there, they have the ability to call that canine officer over to them and have the canine walk around the car.
You made an interesting distinction I want you to expound upon, which is probable cause, as we mentioned it here just a few sentences back, and that is then that the officer then makes a determination that there would be a need to bring in a dog, but is it not until the dog interdicts that you have the ability to enter the car, or do you need permission? Because you can get permission from the person, can I look inside? They say yes or no. If it's no, well, then we bring the dog in, and then the dog gives you the probable cause, right?
Yes, potentially. And like you said, consent, obviously. We can ask it for consent. And there's a thing called plain view as well. So if we can see things in that car that we know are illegal, that would allow us to then go in and retrieve those things and look for other things that would also be in the car accompanying that type of stuff. And so there's a variety of ways, I guess, that we could go about that. But the canine has kind of been upheld as that probable cause standard that automatically allows for us to be able to do that.
How I don't know how you transport chemicals. I mean, that there's going to be a dog involved. I mean, we've seen on television here spare tires, cutouts, parts of the car, whatever the case may be. But is it really that sophisticated, or are a lot of the people that travel around here just have it in the back seat on the floor or something? I mean,
I think we've seen all across the spectrum on that.
A variety. A little bit of both. I would say, though, probably the majority of the time it's not super sophisticated, but we've had people having plenty of hidden compartments within door panels and things like that, and various hiding places within the car and trunk that we've found over the course of time. Different containers that might look like they're a regular can of soda or something like that, but have a storage compartment that unscrews from the bottom. There's a variety of things like that we've run across over the course of years. But most of the time, people aren't going to huge extremes to conceal that stuff. It's glove compartments, center consoles, those types of things where they're just out of plain view. But obviously, a canine can easily pick up that odor.
Talking with Lieutenant Travis Esser, Assistant Chief Pat Zepps here on the Inside program this second Friday of the month of March. You can join us 384-2191, 384-2192 on the program today. So was there one or two recently within a month? I think there were two, right?
Yeah, that's correct. There was two. And actually, just this last weekend, we had another smaller amount of methamphetamine that was taken off a traffic stop. So one of the things I'd like to just throw out there, too, is canines are an amazing tool. We have an amazing community that really supports that program, and we wouldn't be able to do these things without them. But there is, I think Lieutenant Esser alluded to it, some amazing work on the side of proactive policing that gets officers out there who really want to do a good job taking these things off the road. And it really starts with that traffic stop. So it's really a conglomeration of great teamwork between the officer, the canine handler, and that canine that makes all this possible. So. But yeah, there's been two really significant ones that we put out there. We want the community to know that those things are out there and that we're doing our best to take them off the roads. But two really fairly substantial arrests.
And there was a time when you talk about methamphetamine, it can be cooked. And there was a time, you go back decades even, when anhydrous ammonia was being stolen as a part of the recipe. And then ephedrine, and they took it off the market here. You couldn't buy it over the counter for a while. You had to get a prescription for that. And are you seeing cooks as much anymore, or is it mostly stuff being brought in here now?
Around here, we mostly just have stuff being brought in here. We haven't had much for active labs, meth labs, in the recent past. I can think of a couple, and I don't think any within this last year, but the prior year I think we had a couple. And those are obviously very dangerous, and we don't want those.
It used to be more prevalent, didn't it?
It seemed that way, yeah. And then for quite some time, and maybe even now, a lot of them, you'll find in more rural areas, or you'll hear about the more rural counties having the place where the actual lab exists, just because of that dangerous setting that they're in with the potential for explosions and things like that. And so it's nasty stuff for sure, and we're thankful that we haven't been seeing a lot of that actually being manufactured here. It's more so being brought in.
When I lived in Missouri, we used to call it the modern moonshine because it was in the woods in the back where you couldn't smell it. And the odor is one thing that is pretty significant and is also well detected. You know that smell once you've smelled what it is.
Yeah, I remember some time ago the state of Iowa was struggling greatly because it's a rural state, and for whatever reason it attracted a lot of people to the rural areas to manufacture it. And yeah, I mean, anytime you get out of the city, there's probably less likelihood of a neighbor, like you said, smelling something like that. So a lot of those went to the rural areas, and unfortunately that's damaging to the environment. It's damaging to groundwater. You don't know what kind of chemicals are out there, and I don't know that they do the best job cleaning them up when they're done. So just problematic across the board.
And this you want to ingest. It's like, wow. The guy comes to the door and he meets a guy with a hazmat suit on,
right?
And the family comes walking out. I'm like, wow, you really didn't think this through. I guess
it's such an addictive, and that's really kind of the scary part of the world we live in is that, even somebody who's never done something like this tries it once and may not even know what they're doing. The addictive proponents of that are just devastating, and the next thing you know, they're going down the wrong path. So, that's a big problem with it.
And the reason they're bringing it in here is there's money to be made. Evidently, there's if you make enough of it, you can obviously sell it. And once you have, with the addictive properties, a market, now you've got an instant income, so to speak.
And that you touch on an interesting point there because a lot of times we get focused on the arrest itself, but the greater problem lies in where did the subject get it from. When you have an amount of meth that was taken off the road in Marshfield like it was just a couple of weeks ago, where did this person get it and where was it manufactured? And that becomes a really, really paramount problem is trying to trace that back and figure out the source to because that's really how you're going to address the problem. If there's a big market, like you say, and there is, somebody's making it, and then it's filtering down to whoever's distributing it. So trying to get back to that source of manufacture is a really big part of the follow-up investigation.
Well, and sometimes you'll let it go in order to infiltrate if you can.
Right.
Possible. Better give us a lot, but it does happen. I mean,
I don't want to ask you too much because obviously I, give away things.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's no secret that that's a way to do that, and it always has been.
It is, and there are varying levels of effectiveness with that too. And I think that really the crux of that solution depends on an individual who wants to turn their life around, who wants to be done with this and say, okay, I made a mistake here, and I would like to help me move past this. And that's one way that it can be mutually beneficial both to law enforcement. If we can get the producer, we can stop X number of methamphetamine shipments going to wherever they're going and potentially save lives. But also, can we work with the person to try to get them on the right path? And that might be one opportunity for them to take that first step. And
you don't know, I don't know if you know, but where he's been and where, if this person who's in our community with what we would label a significant amount, obviously distributing, has been at his stops yet or is still waiting to get there at any given time. And so you don't know where they've been. And, it's tough because you walk in on people who are probably in a bad way. I mean, they didn't get there because they're having fun. Well, sometimes it starts out that way, but it winds up being, and you see some pretty tragic cases, and it kind of, you make it wonder sometimes, Right, and you're seeing that the national trend is to really look at the addictive part of it and to really ask ourselves, does this person belong in jail? Is that really going to help this person? And so you're really seeing a trend to try to get help for those people who are addicted. Because if you don't break the cycle, a lot of times the jail is just a stopgap for them coming back out. If you don't really deal with the addictive problem, it puts them in a really hard spot to come back out, and they're right back into the same environment. So there's really deeper root causes for some of it that
I think the trend is to try to treat that part of it.
Well, it's funny you should bring that up, because yesterday on the Insight program, that was we delved into that. We had the new criminal justice specialist or advocate, or her title here at Wood County, and talking about what do we do with people that, we talk about mental health specialists,
Right.
because, and my point was that we have mass shootings and we all talk about mental health. It wasn't the gun, it was the gunmen. Okay, we talk about mental health, but that's the long haul game. The short contest is to get it away from, to keep them away from guns,
Right.
or whatever the case may be, that they can do that amount of mass damage. But there's this, we keep talking mental health, but that's a long game, because here is where it starts. On the streets, on the people who, you guys are bringing in, who the frequent flyers are, your officers know when they look around the situation of what people are in, and say, I use the example of drunk driving. He's not a bad driver, he's a drunk. Mm-hmm. You can't do both. Right. So 7 times is not a bad driver.
Right.
That's somebody who's just not able to stop.
All right, and you go back to the importance of working with other agencies, whether it's the Department of Human Services, whether it's medical professionals, because there are things that I truly don't believe we're going to be able to police our way out of. And as long as that market remains and there's people who are suffering with addiction, that problem's going to be there. And that's not something that a standalone police department can fix. We're limited in the environment that we work in, but we are an incredibly active player in that environment, to where we can be that first line of response to set these people in motion, to, even if it's as simple as putting them in touch with somebody that can help them with addiction. That's something that we've got to do on our end.
Well, speaking of that, with Wood County being somewhat of a leader in this, is your department in with the CIT training and sending officers?
Oddly enough, we have, 2 going this week? Yeah, we've got 2 down in training. They're finishing up today. So the goal department-wide has always been to get everybody certified in CIT, and we have more certified than not. So,
for those of you listening or watching, that stands for Crisis Intervention Training, which means that I said years ago, when I was a kid, you got a baton side the head and say straighten up, and you realize that it's more than just that. It's long haul here, whether it be environmental situations that they're in or whether they be mentally challenged. And you don't know when you come up, autism and things like that weren't even considered much with law enforcement. You were there at that point, and intervention was because something's going to happen here. Right. But it didn't have to be, and it turned out to be a bad thing. Mendota had more people than Waupun for a while, because when they got to the judge level, now we've got them mentally incompetent, or where they're temporary insanity or whatever they have here that has to be treated.
Right.
So
and it really does. CIT gives officers tools to confront people who might be suffering from those issues. The other thing that CIT really does is give officers an overview of the whole system, to understand how does the Department of Human Services play in this, how does crisis intervention play into this, how does the Norwood Health Facility play into this, because we're so limited sometimes in the scope of what our job is that we don't know what's going on in the other departments to try to address the issues too. So it really brings that umbrella together, and the feedback has been really good as far as officers even coming out and understanding, okay, there are limitations on what addictive counselors can do, what crisis can do. So it's really been a good program.
This isn't about a nanny state. This is about keeping recidivism down.
Exactly.
You're not holding their hand here, taking them to Health and Human Services.
Right.
You're trying to get them there so that they don't come back again. And
you're talking to 2 guys who've got, between the 2 of us, I don't know, 30, X numbers of years working the road. And that is a huge problem, is that a small portion of the population is the population that we continually deal with. So I really think that as law enforcement moves forward, more attention is going to be given to breaking that cycle, both on the correction side and on the law enforcement side. So hopefully good things will come of it.
And these mass incidents have shown a light on that when we talk about mental health issues. Mm-hmm. I think law enforcement, in the time you just mentioned, how long you've been doing this, has changed significantly in the past few years. when the focus has now been onto that. What am I dealing with when you're walking up on a situation or when you're called to a situation? How much advance can dispatch give you about what's happening? And do these names come up again? And now you know what you're walking into and who you're dealing with and how to deal with them.
Right.
All of those things are something that's been fairly new since, well, I shouldn't say new, but I mean the approach has been different, right?
Yeah, and I think information sharing is what you're hitting on, and I think that's really grown a lot. I know I've talked on this program before, just with interagency operations amongst law enforcement has gotten so much better, and like the active shooter incidences like you had talked about, like our training and preparation for those things with other agencies, whether that be the fire department or the neighboring sheriff's departments or whatever. And in terms of these mental health crises that we deal with, working with all of those other agencies and taking that team approach has gotten much, much better in the last handful of years here. And it needs to, because one of the things I struggled with in law enforcement is oftentimes, and you kind of hit on it before, is we're providing a lot of times a pretty short-term solution to what needs a long-term fix, and we just can't do that, in a half an hour with somebody when we're on scene at something that's chaotic. And it's nice to know and receive training and resources from some of these other entities to be able to offer those things to people, to try to bridge that gap and get that long-term solution to start taking place, even though we can't do it there in the moment. So it's getting a lot better, I think.
And as a taxpayer, I look at this and go, well, we're adding staff. And so where are we going to get all this from? But on the other hand, as we talked about yesterday, the long-term cost of going over and over the same ground again, as opposed to maybe keeping somebody out of the system as we know it, will probably be the savings in the long run.
All right, and I think you're going to see it both on cost savings, and I think you're going to see, hopefully, improved mental health, for people, and maybe addiction goes down if we start to kind of reshape how we look at it. And, that's fairly new in our area. I mean, the size of our agency is interesting, and I know the surrounding agencies have the same thing. It's not like we can just go out and add somebody, to come in and serve in this role right now. There's budgetary things to consider. So with the size that we have, we really rely on those outside agencies to work collaboratively, and there's no cost for crisis intervention training. So that there's no cost to the city of that. The only thing we're paying is for the officers to go there. So there are some great grants out there that the Department of Human Services coordinator found that allows her to put this on twice a year at no cost to the officers of the departments, other than just paying your people to be there. So just going back to, the benefit to the taxpayer, well, you're getting a much more qualified, officer individual because of this training that really doesn't cost us anything.
And when they talk about grant funded, the first thing is, well, what about when the grant runs out? I mean, you can't add a position, so you take the money that you can to do things while you can, and hopefully everybody gets better at it. Then if and when that position goes away, or you can meld it in somehow, or as it begins to end the funding, that it's become second nature for your officers. And
then that's a cost that we would probably be willing to pick up. I mean, we would put that into our training budget because that would be something of importance. So, we'll ride that grant money as long as we can, but that's certainly not something that, as long as we're sitting here, that we would say, no, we're not going to go to this because we have to pay for it, because it's extremely important right now.
Talking with Travis Esser and Pat Zepps here, Marshfield PD, on this second Friday of the month of March here on AM 1450 WDLB. The world of law enforcement has changed. We've seen it in the news over the past year and a half, 2 years especially, and we will talk more about what that means coming up with a couple of veterans here. You can too. 384-2191, 384-2192. WDLB's Insight program for the second Friday in the month of March. You know that if you're listening to us live on radio. Otherwise, if you're watching us on video here, a replay. This is with Marshfield PD, Pat Zepps, and Travis Esser in the studio to talk with you on the phone this morning. If you have any questions or concerns, 384-2191, 384-2192. We had talked about the COVID situation. Schools have been varying degrees of in-person, depending upon age groups in Marshfield here. The younger ones, yes. The older ones, not so much. Has there been any change in the, I would say, teen or young people in the amount of contacts you may have had? I know you had a liaison officer in the high school, but we haven't had high school much. And the kids got a lot of time on their hands. More so, and although they don't seem to be the outdoor type, and that's a stereotype that I don't necessarily agree with, but there are still things going on. Have you noticed any difference in contact with young people?
I don't have the numbers to support it for sure. My hunch is that we've had a slight increase. It hasn't been anything real major, but I think we had mentioned a couple times ago on this program that our school resource officers are still staying plenty busy working cases with the students that are there. And, we get cases brought into our school resource officers, too, from the Department of Human Services that receives information from people. And so they stay very busy working on those investigations as well that involve juveniles. But as far as the uptick in crimes that maybe juveniles might be committing out there, we did have that string of some car entries and some thefts from vehicles not too long ago that we had talked about here as well. Those have kind of died down here now a little bit, but we did just have that little slight increase.
Did you attribute that to that age group?
Some of it, not all of it. But as far as the thefts of the vehicles, not necessarily to that age group, but some of the entries into them, more so that age group. So
the young people, keeping them busy. Do you have a curfew in this town?
Yes, we do. I don't have it memorized, but it's different for each age. It depends on which age gap you fall into. We got one for, like 10 to 12-year-olds, 13 to 15-year-olds, and 16 to 18, or 16, 17. So, that is out there. We do enforce that. We don't run into that a ton. I think most of the time kids are in when they're supposed to be, but here and there we'll get violators. Sometimes, kids out sitting in the park after hours or after curfew and deal with that accordingly. But it's not extreme by any means.
What happens then with them? Is it just a
call to the parents, and we'll oftentimes, take a look at their record to see if we've already been giving them warnings for curfew or not, and make decisions on whether or not they might get a citation from us or a referral to DHS. But it's case-by-case basis.
So it's mostly just contacting adults in charge, supposedly, and finding out where they're supposed to be and
right.
getting them back there, huh?
Yep. Yeah, and I'm sure most parents want to know where those kids are when we come across them, so certainly that's the first phone call that we make to let them know where we've run into contact with their young one, and we kind of take it from there and work with the parents if possible as far as consequences go. We're not quick to jump to necessarily a citation or anything like that. But if it seems the parents are going to be providing some of those consequences, then maybe it's just a verbal warning from us. And like I said, dependent on the past history.
Talking about City of Marshfield curfew, that hasn't crossed my lips in decades. Thinking about that, I didn't realize that was still something that was in place.
It is. It's a little more lax on the weekends, too. The times move back a little bit. So I know for 16 and 17-year-olds, I believe it's midnight on the weekends. And that's only if you're not coming from a legitimate, you have the right to drive home if you're somewhere, but, if you're in transit from a legitimate place to another place, that's a little different than if you're just out cruising around looking for, something chaos to cause.
What I find interesting, and maybe it's my age group, is that how parents do really pay attention now. I was talking to a guy, he said, time to go pick up the kids. I said, man, it's not raining. It's a day like, 40 degrees and sunshine. Why are you doing it? Well, because that's what we do now. We go get them, we pick them up, we drop them off, we make sure they're there. We got cell phones in the pockets, we can ping them. It's like, man, I'm glad I'm not a kid now.
I'm guilty of that. I got a 16-year-old, and he ultimately pays probably an unfortunate price for me being a little bit overprotective, but, and that's a challenge for a parent. At some point you got to let him go a little bit, and he's going to be 17 here in June, and trust that he's where he says he is. So, there's a balance there. But it's tough, and it's up to the parent. But I do know what it feels like to want to text him every half hour and make sure that he's where he says he's supposed to be, and, I try to refrain from a little bit, so.
Well, it's tough today. For them, and with the social world being on its ear without school for a year too, I don't know. I made a comment. I said, I don't know how I would have turned out had I been a young person today. I'm looking at them and going, what are they going to be when they're 40 and 50? If this is what they fall back on, is the good years, the formative years.
And that's a conversation that I've had with them, and we've talked, and I think it's important for parents to realize exactly what you just said, that they're going through something that we really can't comprehend. I can't comprehend being back to my high school junior year and going once a week and really having everything else shut down around town. So, kind of take a step back, and that goes back to some of the mental health things. I mean, very concerned about kids and their well-being, and that's a big part of them maturing. And I'm just speaking from a parent here. To try to find that balance of safety, being cognizant of the virus, but also understanding that, there's some life that's probably got to be lived here. So that's a lot of that. It's just up to the individual parent.
Well, because of my age, I might be a little cavalier. Let them walk. Yeah. But everybody's like, oh, no, you can't let them. I said, it's Marshfield, for crying out loud. I notice a big drop in traffic. Evenings especially. Boy, the sun goes down. I can pull out in the corner now where I was normally waiting even on Peach Avenue for, it looked like a football game let out, but not anymore.
I've also noticed that when I'm out past, what is it, 8 p.m. now that I'm in for the night there, Travis? No, that's not true. When I'm out and about too, I've noticed that, and there was a pretty decent dip in our traffic stops from last year too. From in 2020 because of COVID, and I just attributed a lot of that to fewer people moving.
Does it make it, well, my question is, and I think I know the answer, but that's the first part, does it make it easier to find violators? And second of all, are you as aggressive?
Well, we tried to find a balance in that too. I remember talking, last June or something, about, because back then a lot of officers weren't sure on the degree of risk involved in that interaction between themselves and a driver at that distance, and whether we should be wearing masks at that time and not, and just kind of trying to work through what those traffic stops look like. You're right. I think there was less opportunity out there, less people driving. So we did, like Pat said, we saw a dip in some of those traffic stops. But as time went on, I think it kind of became business as usual for the most part. It was probably a little harder for the officers to maybe see violations out there with less cars on the road potentially. But ultimately, that can be a good thing too, right? I mean, that we don't have maybe as many crashes or things going on out there with drivers being out at late hours of the night, maybe less OWIs occurring as well. And so there's a positive and negative to it, but we tried to balance that the best that we could, and I think it turned out okay so far from what we can tell.
Well, your favorite question, what about your quotas?
I think those were, I've been here a date myself. Of course, everybody knows my date now because my age came out last time, but I've been here going on 24 years, and those have been gone for so long, but it's amazing how many people still believe that exists. Those were out of the profession before I even started 24 years ago. But there's a perception out there that, what I'll tell you is there's an expectation that officers keep busy, that they go out and they do what's described in their job. And one part of that is traffic enforcement. We really don't get into counting citations versus warnings or this and that, but we do have the expectation that officers are out there being proactive because, it's widely known and proven that, when you are active in traffic enforcement, that creates great visibility for the department. And other crimes tend to go down.
Do you encourage that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Traffic stops?
No, I mean visibility.
Yes.
You don't park behind a sign anymore and wait for me to come zoom by?
I'm not going to say some people don't do that. Again, I think Travis touched on that give and take, different tactics depending on the situation.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that too, Central Avenue. If you stopped every speeder, you'd have tiki torches and pitchforks at your department. I mean, you can't.
Now, there was a time we probably did that, though.
Yeah.
There's an ill will there there's a trade-off between, and it's not just police or law enforcement, it's parenting, it's everything. There's a trade-off between being to the letter and being reasonable.
And what what is the objective really when you look at traffic enforcement or any of those types of things? It's compliance. And sometimes when a problem arises, and we'll get very specific complaints of speed, and I know we've talked about that. Well, that might require us to take a week and put some people up there, and it might require writing a few citations. It might require doing a bunch of stops and writing warnings. Presence is part of it, but if there isn't the other part of it, people are going to really catch on quick that, okay, if there's a car sitting there, I'll slow down. If there's not, I'm good to go. So there's a part of it, and they're just different tactics that kind of all compile to get us in the same place, and that's voluntary compliance. I remember years ago we would have, I was on a shift and we were all active, and you would see lights from one side of Central to the other because we'd have anywhere from 4 to 5 traffic stops, legitimate good traffic stops with the goal of slowing people down and just getting that voluntary compliance.
Yeah, I still remember the talk about those days.
Yeah.
You're still not popular for that.
Well, there's a lot more traffic back then, too, than there was. I mean,
was.
once graduated driver's licenses came about for teenagers, that put kids at home a lot earlier in the evening. And so there, kind of after that happened, when we used to be seeing a lot more traffic after midnight, that really cut down the amount of traffic after midnight. And the streets definitely were a lot quieter. So... just changes in laws, and I think overall, we've talked before too. A lot of kids are communicating more so through their electronic devices and stuff now than sitting in cars driving up and down Central Avenue like they used to do years ago.
Yeah, I think about cruising, or they'd shag us out of a parking lot because we were a nuisance or something in front of a business, and I talk about that now, and my grandkids look at me and go,
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Why would you do that? We're talking about $4 a gallon gas coming back here again. It's like,
we didn't have Xboxes though like they do now. I mean, that things are amazing. They can sit and talk to all their friends right from their bedroom.
Yeah.
You get 5 or 6 of them talking, playing this mutual game. So.
Yeah, it's a different world. Than you can do a lot of stuff from right where you are, and good, bad, whatever. I said, when we talked about video games, how terrible that was, and then suddenly the Army was recruiting them for drones. You got experience with a joystick, you're in.
Right.
I mean, that was something that we never really thought about being as a positive. But it's all relative to, and because of that, like I said, I don't know how the world's going to look. Only they will determine that.
Right.
Your son and daughter are going to determine how their world looks. I don't know how it's going to look. I know how mine look. I wish I could take them back, but I can't. Not because it was so good. Crime was just as bad then. People were just as mean. There was, domestic violence and things that weren't going unchecked and all that business. But it seemed to be a kinder, gentler society. The fuse wasn't so short on people. I won't say there wasn't road rage, but usually between two people who knew each other.
Sure.
You touch on something, and it's cyberbullying, and there's avenues out there to do things that we didn't have, and to cause those types of problems. So they're dealing with, like you said, stressors and things that we didn't have to deal with. Being bullied online or those types of things. So it's tough.
I see more of that on your police blotter, where people, it will either be, it could be electronically, or it could be not even a violation of a restraining or anything. Just, somebody's former boyfriend, former girlfriend harassing one another, and I see a lot of that in your police blotter, more so than, now with less traffic stops, a lot more domestic stuff going on.
Right. Right. A lot of stressors out there, and when you start to, and again, I have not done statistical research on it, but I do keep up on current events in law enforcement, and the belief is that those types of crimes have gone up, just as a virtue of people being more secluded and not getting out. But so there are drawbacks to everything. It's kind of a cause and effect type of philosophy. So.
I don't know how we got in that conversation. I was talking to somebody my age, and I said, remember when we'd be in the tavern and we'd get into a fist fight and everybody go out and pound on each other for a while and then come in and finish your beer?
Yeah.
You don't have that. That's the thing. And what we talked about under the walking around the fairgrounds with open container now is that used to be common. It used to be there'd be a Donnybrook out in the middle of the midway, and there'd be beer flying, and everybody's got a jag on, and then you'd have to come in there and be the referee and try to pull everybody apart and toward and close and, black eyes. And people don't do that anymore. Now, I'm not saying it never happens, but in that way that we deal with each other now, You just don't have that much. Now they just pull something and it's over.
And even in the time that I've been doing this job, those types of fights and those bars, they seem to have gone down even from my early days. I don't have anything to back that up, but those types of calls don't seem as prevalent at all, which is a good thing. I mean, in the end of it, as long as they're not, like you said, going to some other means, that's far more dangerous. So.
Yeah, I don't know how, well, I guess I do know how, but people, aggressive toward each other now, it's either online or they'll hack you or they'll do something, that's a little more insidious than just a plain old punch in the snoot like we used to do it.
Yeah.
So, which is nice for you. You don't have to be in there trying to get them apart, and calm things down and start handing out citations, because now, if you guys years ago would take a shot in the shoulder with a fist, you just shrug it off. Now there's like, that's like touching the referee. You're going in the sin bin now. Things got a little stricter over the years,
right.
And to your the way you handle things. Talking with Marshfield PD, Pat Zepps and Travis Esser in here studio. You may be watching us on video here at Marshfield Media Access, or you could see us on Channel 989, your Spectrum Digital tier, live this second Friday of the month of March here on WDLB's Insight program. WDLB's Insight program this second Friday in the month of March. You know that if you're listening live, you may be watching us here on video on Channel 989 on your Spectrum Digital tier or at marshfieldmediaaccess.org or their Facebook page. Several ways now that you can get access to this program. Second Friday of the month means we talk with members of Marshfield PD, Lieutenant Travis Esser, Assistant Chief Pat Zepps in here. Assistant Chief, how long is that going to go on, or what's the situation now that the former, now we call him, has resigned? Rick Gramza resigned. Now there's going to be some movement here. What do you know about what's going to happen?
Well, I know very little. I know in the Police and Fire Commission meeting just this week, they had discussed meeting with the Police and Fire Commission, meeting with Human Resources and the City Administrator to discuss what that timeline or that next step looks like, and that's really all the information I have as far as a chief replacement.
I could ask you questions like, well, what's the traditional way to do this? Hire from within, or would there be, from without? But it all, as you know, it all depends.
It does depend, and those are decisions that are made by people not in the department. The Police and Fire Commission plays a big role in that as far as what does the future of the department look like, and who do they identify as the person they want to take it there. So most, in fact, I think the majority of chief hires that I'm aware of have been internal. That's a testament to this place and the people that have been groomed and ready to take over. But ultimately that decision, rests with the city and the Police and Fire Commission as far as how they want to do that. But I would imagine there'll be some sort of a application process. But again, I don't have a definitive answer on that right now.
Well, I think EOE will determine that has to happen.
Sure.
You have to give it out there and see what happens. The tough part is like any job, though. Do you hire somebody who's had it, well, this is the way we did it there, or do you have some promote from within, and then you worry about the situation you just wound up with?
Well, and I think what you touch on there would indicate that there's some sort of a concern about that, and I can tell you from my time at that department, that was isolated. I don't believe that there's any type of a cultural problem there that would show up in any future leaders that might come from within that department. But ultimately, that's one of the questions that they're going to have to ask themselves. But I think that could happen regardless of where you hire someone from. I mean, that was something that was isolated to that individual. And just because you go outside there's no guarantee that can't happen. Much like if you go inside, there's no guarantee that can't happen. You just have to do your due diligence. Look at your candidates, do your backgrounds, and really kind of just break it down to who you believe is the best fit.
Well, I don't mean to be confrontational, but there had to be somebody in the department, and you guys had to. There were other people who knew what was going on and either didn't say, not necessarily were, in favor of or complicit in what was going on, but I don't, and your point is well taken. That doesn't mean that even if they knew that they would continue to have some sort of illicit operations going on, but it had to be fairly well known.
Well, I can't answer the question because I can't speak for everybody that works there, but I can tell you that in my time there, no one ever approached me with any type of a policy type of concern from what he was doing. So I don't believe that was known to that level, but that's not been. Nobody's told me.
I don't know that it was a policy thing. I don't know if I was in your officer's shoes, I would either. But It was whispers. There was stuff talked about in the hall, and for what that's worth in any job or any situation, I don't know. But
and all I can say is the whispers never got to my door. They didn't, and that's. Maybe that's indicative of something that we've got to work on too. But again, I don't know, and I can't speak for all the officers there and the civilian employees to say whether or not they definitively knew something like this was occurring, because I have not found anybody that does. So,
if you're not familiar, we're addressing the situation of the resignation of former Police Chief Rick Gramza and the publicity of the situation that caused that to happen. And I'm inquiring as to rank and file people here on what they knew. Or I didn't expect you to say anything on a microphone, but on the other hand, I'm just telling you what people are saying, and I probably are well aware of that anyway.
Oh yeah, and I'm completely aware. And one of the struggles that we have is, to what level do we as a department insert ourselves into that messaging? Because really, with the position he held, that was for the city to kind of dictate that messaging. And just a testament to everybody that works there, we really just remained focused on what our mission was, keeping the department moving forward, keeping services the same, so that the community as a whole didn't have to see that if they needed a police officer for something. So that's about the best answer I can give for something like that.
Well, I appreciate you guys showing up here and availing yourself to us and citizen calls as well. So I guess the phone inactivity is a good thing. in some
it could be.
In some respects, huh?
Yeah.
Here on AM 1450, WDLB's Insight, Pat Zepps and Travis Esser in with me on the Insight program. I'm Jeff Cannon.